My name is Linda Kutagawa. I am the president and CEO of LEAP, right there, today. And we're really quite excited to be here, and we're going to be presenting a panel focused on really helping you to start thinking about, how do you continue on your student activism or your community involvement even after you graduate from college. And it is possible, and it's actually a great way for you to think about how you can differentiate yourself in a very large workplace. It's kind of like, when you're applying to college, how do you make yourself stand out? And actually, this is something that you could use to really leverage and to be a differentiator in terms of why you would be better than, say, somebody else for a job that you're really interested in, and really being able to marry that. So the opportunity for this actually comes courtesy of our sponsor, which is Nissan, and so I do want to really quick acknowledgement and shout out to them. I know that you're going to hear a little bit more about some of the other things we're doing, but I want to just quickly mention that in terms of LEAP, we are a nonprofit. We're based here in the Southern California area. Headquarters are in Little Tokyo and LA, but we do our work all over the country, and we're really focused on being able to grow and develop leaders. But particularly, we want to grow and develop leaders from within the Asian and Pacific Islander communities. Because, believe it or not, there are still so many more opportunities for any of you to break new ground when it comes to leadership and really being role models for others. And so, hopefully as a result of something that you hear here, you'll be inspired to maybe do something different, go into the community, make a difference in your workplaces depending on whatever it is that you want to do. And so I do want to just say thank you to our panelists, Saima, Tami, Scott, and Nikki, who will be able to share with you just in terms of their perspectives, how have they been able to bring their activism from campus into the kind of work that they do now in their careers. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Nikki. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. And thank you to LEAP and its supporters and sponsors, as well as APSA here at UC Irvine for making this panel possible. This is, first of all, who's got food coma? Hopefully, okay, yeah, that's okay, that's okay. Well, we're going to make this really interesting for you, and hopefully you can walk away from this panel with, an idea of what kinds of skills that you feel like you're already developing, what kind of skills you feel like you want to seek out, and a way to reclaim, rebuild, and reimagine your future as a professional based on the skills and everything that you've been absorbing from this conference. So with that, I just want to wish you all good afternoon. And my name is Nikki Modi. I'm going to be moderating this panel. Like Linda said, this panel is really exciting because we have representatives from different sectors, but all of them have something in common, which is that they were sitting in your shoes not too long ago, also very active on their campuses, organizing, putting together events, and working from within the community to try to make some amazing change. So we have a couple questions already sort of planned out to really shape this conversation this afternoon. But this is your panel and this is your time. So we also want to be able to open it up to specific things that you may be curious about and that you really want to learn about in this panel. So we'll start off with a little bit of information about ourselves, but then I'm going to turn to you guys and ask you, what do you really want to focus on? What's a burning question that you have based on some of the teaser that we'll provide you this afternoon, and then we can take it from there. So great. Oh, did we already have a question? Oh, okay. So, the first question that we're going to ask is, what were you like in college? And it wasn't too long ago, so we're going to start with Saima Hussain. But first, if you can all introduce yourselves as well.
Sure. Sometimes it feels like a really long time ago, but it was not too long ago. So my name is Saima, and I work at the South Asian Network, also known as SAN. We're based not really too far from here, right on the border of LA and Orange County, in this little town called Artesia, where if you're ever looking for good samosas and other Indian food, that would be the place to go. So I've been at SAN for about 6 years, and I was like this in college, kind of little, all over the place. I'd actually, when I started college, I went to a little college in upstate New York. I was maybe one of very few people of color. Certainly not a lot of South Asian folks. Certainly not a lot of Asian kids. And so I don't think I did a lot of organizing and advocacy work, but I didn't really come into working with the Asian community broadly until I moved to LA about 6 years ago. So I'm super psyched to be here. But when I went to college, I had just moved from Pakistan. So that's where I was born and raised, kind of a little all over the place. But I moved, my high school was in Pakistan, so I moved as this and so everything was I was like, damn, everything, right? It's not just about what I got in high school was science, but I got so I just signed up for everything. I was doing dance and rugby and and volunteering and theater and just it was sort of for me. So I was a little dabbling in all kinds of stuff, and I think that was my chance to sort of find myself and also see how things intersect. And how we can utilize things like art while serving folks, and just how it all comes together.
So I'm Tami. I work at Edison International right now, and I do corporate communications for them. But it's a utility, and I never thought I would be at a utility, so we can kind of talk about how on earth I ended up there. But what I was like in college, I was a commuter student, so I drove to school every day, and I spent a lot of time on my friends' couches because when you were out working and doing things on campus, you kind of need a place to crash afterwards. So I felt like there was a way to be engaged even though I didn't live on campus and have that kind of experience. But I was a really focused student, and I was somebody who really knew that I wanted to do something after college, so it's really great that I can be here to kind of share what I did after that. But I guess I share that because I feel like college was a time for me to really experiment and kind of figure out what it was that I liked and didn't like to do. And so I know we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I kind of feel like it was a really great time to just try everything and anything and make the most of whatever college had for me. So it was just a really fun time, and I felt like I was one of those dorky students that actually went to office hours. Because, we should talk about this because I feel like I really think that was my way back then to make the most of getting information and being resourceful. Because if the teacher said or the professor said I will be in office hours from this time to this time, I, Tami Bui, would go to those office hours and I would ask them what are you going to ask on the final? What should I write on my paper? And they would tell me, and they would write letters of rec for me. So I feel like it's kind of a matter of using what's at your disposal when you're in college. And so I guess I would encourage you guys to do that, and we could talk a little bit more about looking back what else I did. But I feel like that was one of the best things I did was make the most of the people and the programs that were available to me.
Hi everyone, my name is Scott Chan. Currently I work at it's a really long name, so just bear with me. It's the Asian Pacific Islander Obesity Prevention Alliance. So we can just say APIOPA, it's like tapioca. But don't eat, and I told them this, don't eat tapioca. So APIOPA, we work on access to healthy food, access to healthy environments, specifically for Asian and Pacific Islander community members. I guess in college, what was I like in college?
Yeah.
So I came out of high school, for some reason I thought I was a Republican. I went to UCLA and I said, oh, that's what a Republican is? That's terrible. No offense, no, I'm sorry. But I think what I learned in college, I learned the most outside of my classes. I was a political science major, I was an Asian Am minor, but I felt like I learned all the skills I need today from campus organizing, from organizations I was a part of on campus. Because it taught me a lot of skills, like how to communicate with people, how to listen. I think the most important thing is listening, right? As a campus organization, you want to do what's best for your membership or the students or whatever it is. That requires you to listen. And I think when you come into a nonprofit, it's the exact same thing. You're not going to go and tell a community how to do something. You got to listen, you got to learn, and then you develop something from that. So I think for me, what I learned the most from college was classes are great, and you can do well in them, and that's fine. But try to grow those skills outside in other different opportunities.
Wonderful. Thank you all. So it is a Saturday afternoon, and clearly you all made the choice to be here on a Saturday afternoon and to listen to so many people speak and share their voices and stories. And so, Simon, when you were saying earlier that you came and you're like, God, they have everything. It can be really overwhelming. So how do you make the choice, with whatever limited time you have, balancing school, relationships, friends, family obligations, all sorts of things? How did you pick and choose what you were going to try to prioritize in college?
So
and to everyone.
I mean, I think I changed a lot over the years, right? So I had this little book where I wrote out, like, you know, back in the day when I was like keeping a tally of like all the stuff that I was doing. And, you know, in my freshman year, I was like doing 20 different things, right? And then by senior year, it's like down to 4, right? Because it's that process of figuring out what really matters to you and what really gels. And so, but you only figure that out by trying everything, right? Especially for me, right? Like, you know, so I was just, and so it really shifted, but you know, you try everything, you figure out what works, you figure out what actually resonates with you. You know, and if you're lucky enough to know that when you get to college, like, good for you, right? But I think I was sort of the other way. I was like super crazy when it came to extracurricular activities, but I was super the other way around when it came to academics. Like I was like focused, like a laser, like that is the degree I want and only that, and I was like, you know, and so I think what was really great about that was that like I had some great professors who pushed back and said, whoa, like, you know, like first semester, freshman year, are you sure you want to declare your major right now? It's probably not a good idea. Why don't you go explore some other things? So I think there's a lot of back and forth with kind of really pushing myself in terms of extracurriculars, but not being open to other opportunities academically. And I think what I ended up graduating with was very different from what I thought I was going to end up graduating with. And so I learned a lot from that. And some of that was a term abroad experience that I think you sort of have your gut. You know, there was a term abroad experience to go to Brazil. I don't speak Portuguese. I know no one in Brazil, but I just like I just woke up and I was like, I have to go. And you just go, and so it's sort of about following your gut and trying to figure out like what really meshes with you. And the things that don't mesh eventually fall, you know, and you don't do them. And that's okay. You got to prioritize at some point.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. It was, you know, in college you're obviously busy and you have your hands full, and there's only so much time and energy that you have. So how did you pick and choose what you wanted to prioritize in college, whether it was within a student club or, you know, balancing the academic things, but really with a focus on, you know, how did you pick and choose the kinds of opportunities outside of the classroom that you could really take?
Okay, so here's the thing. We're all at a conference for Asian Pacific Americans, and I feel like one of the things, or just people of color, that we have a really hard time doing is saying that we deserve something, right? That we're entitled to something. And I will say when I was in college, I felt like, hey, I had scholarships that I worked really hard for, and it's paying for my education, so I felt like I'm going to use every bit of the money that my tuition is going for my classes. So I said earlier, like I was a dork, I went to office hours, but the reason for that, and the reason I took, I used to take 20 units, like the max, and I would do linguistics, or I would sign up for the honors program and did things, not because I needed a program, but because I felt like it was making the most of what my education was going to do. I was the first to go to college. I felt like, I don't know, I think there's also Asian guilt, you know, of your parents telling you, you know, you need, so I felt like, for me, balancing was just kind of picking what it was that I felt like I could make the most of for myself. So if I knew that I could do internships that could help me apply for jobs later, that's kind of how I chose it. If it allowed me to travel and be in DC, so one of the things I did, because I took so many units, is I finished early. So then I just created a program for myself through the Poli-Sci program, and I went to DC and I just did internships there. I did them with JACL, OCA, CRAC, which is the Southeast Asian Resource Action Center, National Capacity, which is the National Coalition for Asian Pacific American Community Development, and all those other acronyms that we have in our community. So it's kind of about doing, I felt like what Scott said earlier, it was kind of about doing everything else, but reading and doing the things in my classes that was really exciting. And I felt like if I could choose things that would matter to me, that I could then use that to leverage the next step that I took beyond college. Because I knew college was only going to be so long, and I was ready to do other things. So whatever it was that I chose to do, I made sure that I maximized those opportunities, and I could use it to do other things once I graduated. And you're entitled to that. You're here for a reason. You made a choice to be here, so make the most of it so that you can use it for something after you graduate.
I mean, I would echo a lot of what the other panelists said. I think trying a lot of new things, especially when you have the time. I just think of my own example. So I went into UCLA civil engineering program because my parents wanted me to be a civil engineer. because my dad owns a civil engineering company and I'm supposed to take over that civil engineering company. And I started taking the classes and it just really wasn't vibing with me. I suck at math, so I don't know why I thought I should do that program. And I started taking Asian Am classes. I started getting involved in the Asian Pacific Coalition at UCLA, and I started learning about Asian American history, and I thought, wow, I never would have learned about this at all in a civil engineering program. And I think that kind of set off that catalyst of, one, I had to stand up to my parents. I had to tell them I'm going to be Asian Am minor. Why would you do Asian Am minor? What does that even mean? And it's really tough. I'm sorry, I think I'm going into like another question here, but it was really hard to change major and to tell like my Chinese parents that I was thinking of doing nonprofit as a career, because for them, they just didn't understand what I was doing. I was throwing away a perfectly good opportunity. My dad told me I'm like his biggest failure, and he still tells me, every week he'll tell me, like, you're failing me. But I think what I learned in college is standing up for what I believe in, looking up opportunities that make sense for me, and trying to but understand where my parents are coming from, but also being able to do what I want to do with my life, right? And I think in terms of what we were saying here, involvement in different organizations, I was involved in a lot of different groups in the first 2 years, but as you find a group that you really like, stick with that group. Stick with the challenges. I mean, all student organizations are going to have challenges, and facing those challenges is really important because those teach you skills that you'll need in the real world.
That's wonderful, thank you. And so clearly, our panelists have said quite a bit, and there's so much more that we can ask questions for. So again, I do have questions prepared, but I'm pretty confident that the questions that you have and that the things you really want to know might be far more interesting. So at this point, does anyone actually have, we're going to try to make it pretty open. Does anyone have any questions or something that you want to follow up on, or, any specific questions about what they did or what you're doing right now, or what kinds of skills you're developing or you want to develop? And, I really want to know how to plan a budget. Is that something that's relevant in the real world? Anything goes. So are there any questions? Yeah, go for it.
Hi, my name is Luke. I'm from UCI APSA. And this question is for Scott, but it's open to the other two panelists as well. So when you're going out into the world and you're applying for a job, what sort of skills as an Asian American student leader will make you very marketable to being Asian American professional leader?
What kind of job? What kind of jobs are you applying for?
I guess in the community work, like community work or nonprofit, or even in the private sector or government work.
Feel free to jump in.
Well, he asked you, so I think
I think what's important is that you can show that you've worked with the community, that you have experience working with some type of community, like you've been able to do some kind of project or some kind of program that shows that you took leadership on that. I think the way a lot of nonprofits work, if you want a job in a nonprofit, you have a much better chance of getting a job if you volunteered there or interned there before. And it's not always the best practice, but the reason that is because if you've interned there, they've trained you, they've put that time to develop you, they've worked with you, they know who you are, and it makes it a much better chance for them to want to hire you. It's not the best practice, but I think that's just what it is based off nonprofit capacity. For me, I think good communication skills is very important to show that you can listen and that you can analyze more deeply a situation and kind of think it more holistically, right? So if it's like there's one problem, you're not just going to approach it from one angle. You're going to look at all the potential intersectionality of solving that issue.
So first of all, I would say you should follow up with Scott and make sure that after this you get our contact information. But if something Scott says resonates with you, follow up with him and find out what was Scott's process for that. So I would do that. And the next thing I would say is we talked about government and other sectors too. I would say when you talk about making an impact in the community, it doesn't have to be one way. So just because I remember I thought, oh, maybe I want to be a nonprofit executive director. But now I work at a utility. right? And Nissan, who Linda mentioned earlier, Nissan may help make this possible, right? So working in the corporate sector, I guess I'm putting a plug for myself and my company. But I'm just saying, all I'm saying is there's no one way to do it, right? And so the skills that Scott talks about, having communication skills, being a people person and working in organizations means that you can work with difficult people, right? You go through a lot of challenges, you probably fight with each other about what priorities are, what you guys want to stand for, so those are the types of things you'll deal with in the real world, and I feel like as long as you continue to be able to articulate what it is that you want and stand up for yourself, like those are all the kind of skills that you're going to need in the workforce. And when I say stand up for myself, I literally mean that, because when you go out in the government sector, political world, or corporate sector, or nonprofit when you're applying for grants, you need to be able to, have a voice, right? And that's kind of what you guys are doing now. And so I would just say apply that and keep that voice, because when you leave these walls, not everyone understands like what it means to be API, right? So you're gonna have to be able to use that voice and be able to say what it is that you want and convince people of that. So that's communication skills, that's having the people skills that we're talking about. I think that's really, really important.
I mean, the only thing I'd add to that is, so I interview a lot of students and generally a lot of other folks, and do a lot of hiring for SAN, not just in terms of staff, but also volunteers and interns. And I think, all of this completely agree with, and the only things I would add is that what really resonates with me is people who take leadership, right? Like, so it's not just I was in school and I went to class, right? But here's all this other stuff that I did. Here's how I connected with the real world. And it's not just like that there's 20 different things listed, but here's this one real project, even if it's one thing, this one real thing that I felt really passionate about and where I took initiative, right? Like, so I was a leader, I took initiative in this, and I feel really passionate about this, and this is why it's awesome. Right? Because I think it's really sort of about selling yourself, and it's not sort of about it's not about not being humble or not, or being like, oh, I'm just the best person ever. But, like when you do something, whatever organizing that is, because even with, I'm at SAN, but I do volunteering at other places on the side, and if I'm doing that, if I'm spending my time on anything, that means I'm really passionate about it, and I think that this thing is the best thing. This is our best chance to change the world, right? And then I have to be able to say that to someone. I have to be able to explain why spending 10 hours doing whatever project that you're working on or whatever group you're in is the best thing ever. And if you can explain that to me and sell it to me, then I'm with you, because I feel your passion and I feel that you made a commitment to something, and you're likely to then make a commitment to be wherever you're working or wherever you're planning on interning, you're going to make that same commitment to that position, which means you're going to be reliable, which means you're going to do all those things that people want you to be in the workplace, which is show up on time and communicate and get the work done. So.
Yeah, go for it.
So just one more thing, even before you go in and apply for a job and all that, boost up your resume and everything like that, it's really about, and I'm sure Tami can talk about this, who you know. It's about those relationships that you've built, especially in nonprofit world. Everyone knows everyone, right? So if you've done something really bad to one org, we're going to know about it. People are going to tell, So it's really important who you know, because those folks will, tell you if there's a job opening somewhere. For me, a lot of the jobs I've received, people know the work I do, and they say, hey, there's a job opening. Do you want to apply for this? We think you'd be really great for this position. It's using, for me, a lot of those volunteer opportunities that I do, stuff I do outside of work, that's where I build up those relationships with people, let them know who I am, what I do, and they're advocates for me when I need to look for a job.
So I'm actually getting my MBA right now, and one thing that I found out only a little bit ago is that, how sometimes on the internet or on LinkedIn or if you see it somewhere, there'll be like a posting for a job opening. 70% of the time by the time that thing is actually online, that position's already filled. And it's filled because the companies have already either hired from within, or they're filling it up with people that they know. And it's on experience, it's on the relationships that they've built. So the importance of being able to, I'm going to use the word network, but really it's the importance of being able to go out there and have conversations and meet people and give them the opportunity to learn about you as much as you're learning about them is absolutely crucial, especially for those of you that are juniors and seniors, and in just a matter of months or years, you're going to be out there and you're going to be looking for a job. So keep that in mind. before we move on to a question based on, an awesome insight that Tami made, I was just going to add one more skill on top of this, and that's the ability to form allies and empathy, actually. Empathy is a really underrated, overlooked skill. And that's the ability to see things the way other people experience them. And it's not, oh, I feel bad for you, or I'm sympathetic. It's more like, oh, I see what you're experiencing, and I'm trying to see it from your perspective. So, we're here for APSA, and it's clearly, it's an Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander space, but at the same time, like, how many of you guys on campus, whether it's here or, back at UC Santa Barbara or anywhere, how many of you actually attend meetings from other organizations, like something from, a Pride or LGBT group, or something, organized by a Black Student Union? Can you raise your hands? That's awesome, and that's wonderful. I think that's going to give you a whole new perspective about how different communities see things and work and make change too. Hopefully, it can be all of you raising your hands, and you and your friends, because the kinds of insights that you make now you'll carry those with you when you work, whether it's in the community or you want to work for a company that you see up there, any kind of sector. The ability to be able to go across lines, that are so-called constructed, but the ability to form these kinds of allies and coalitions is really going to help make real change out in the real world. So I just wanted to add that in. But Tami, you mentioned that you don't have to be within the community. You don't have to be working for a nonprofit to contribute and make a lot of change. And as much as we do need Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and Asian American leaders in our community, we need them actually everywhere, really, to be the decision makers. So can you talk a little bit more about how people make change and how they use their campus-based skills at like a utility company or at another business you're familiar with?
Okay, so here's the thing. I work at a utility, but I would say that actually my job is to be at the table, right? So at Edison, I'm Vietnamese American. I'm a young female, and I don't have any technical experience in like electricity. But my background is I can say this is what our community cares about. This is when we fund programs. These are things, and I don't have to have a title to do that. So I guess I'll share with you first that when I was in college, after I graduated, I went up to Sacramento to do a fellowship, and I ended up working for several members of the legislature. And I did that because I wanted to know, when I write letters to the editor, or when I do letter writing campaigns, like, do they really care? Or like, do they care that we do any sort of like marches or rallies? Like, who's really listening to us? And so I did that because I wanted to understand like where or how decisions get made. And so I would just say that I think for me, I've always been fascinated about where power lies, because at the end of the day, it's people who are in positions of power that make decisions that affect all of our communities, right? And so whether you do that in the government sector, and that's kind of where I started, or then so I started there and I was kind of like, oh, I wasn't the Asian Pacific Islander representative. Some of you may know, members' offices that have like representatives. There are jobs like that. So there are jobs, for example, where if you know the community and you're from the community, you can actually be a representative for that senator or Congress member. So I don't want to assume everybody knows that. So I just want to say that's like a potential job opportunity for folks that do the kind of have interest that you guys have. But that's one area. And then after I worked in Sacramento, I decided, well, corporations need people that can relay information about our community to the company too. So it really doesn't have anything to do with the utility as much as it has to do with being able to speak up on behalf of your community. I hope that makes sense. I don't know if I answered your question.
I think you outlined different ways that people do it, either as representatives or through dark skill. Yeah. So let's open it back up to you guys. Is there another question that comes to mind that you want to ask? Yes.
I have a question for Saima. You speak 5 languages, so just curious which ones and how you've been able to sort of market that skill.
So they're not all marketable languages. So I was raised bilingual in Urdu and English because I'm from Pakistan. So that's 2. And then I learned, and then the rest I learned in college/grad school. Is because I'm not a language. I'm not a in-class language learner. I can take a class and get absolutely nothing out of it. I'm a doer, or just a connector. And so the other languages are French, Dutch, and Portuguese. And that's because, again, I went on a term abroad to Brazil, fell in love with it. I lived there for a number of years. I went to grad school in the Netherlands. I took 0 classes, but I think there's a certain like osmosis of being in a space, and that's how I learned it. And again, it's because I wanted to connect with people, right? Like, so most folks in Brazil are monolingual Portuguese speaking. They're not, English is, you don't get very far. You certainly don't get very far with Urdu either. And I really wanted to be able to communicate with people and work there and really give back. And so my way to do that is I don't think I can do that until I know how to communicate with people. So it wasn't until I moved back to LA and started at SAN that I actually did work in Urdu, which is a whole other, right? Because you can speak a language culturally at home or with your family and friends, and then you can speak it in the workspace and ask people about breast cancer or domestic violence or other things in language, and I think that's a whole other, so I feel like I'm constantly learning. Languages are awesome.
So I think I saw another hand. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
just had a really simple question.
Can you introduce yourself? Sorry, as you asked.
I'm Mason, and I'm a student at UCSD. I was just wondering if all 4 of you were in the LEAP internship program prior to this meeting, or at any point in your career that is what started you to move towards nonprofits or utilities or whatever.
Yeah, so I was in this LA internship, and then Leap hired me afterwards, and then I coordinated the LA internship. So I've definitely been through it. I think for me, I was thinking of going into nonprofit and doing community work before that, but it definitely helps solidify it because it's a great program that Nissan funds that puts a student, for folks who don't know, the internship will pay you to be in a nonprofit 4 days of the week, and then the 5th day, Leap will give you some leadership training. So it's a great opportunity because I got to go into the community. I get paid to do it, which is very rare at a nonprofit, So for me, it was a great opportunity and, further solidify that this is what I want to do.
Yeah, so I had the same experience as Scott. I was fortunate enough to be a Leadership in Action intern, and I did that right after I graduated. So Scott kind of outlined the program, but I would say that the neat thing about it, so LEAD places you at different types of nonprofits based on whatever your interest level is. I happened to do my internship at LEAP. So the really neat thing about being a LEAP intern is that LEAP does leadership training for all sectors. And the reason that's important is because we talked about how you can be a leader in whether it's nonprofit, or whether it's government and public sector, or whether it's corporate sector, where I am now. And the really neat thing is, I didn't know about it then, but I kind of feel like I've dabbled in all areas. I've ended up in corporate. But it was neat to be able to try and see, like, how do nonprofits operate? And then how do people, they also do trainings for higher education. So like your college administrators, your faculty members, so they work in that space also. And then they also work in the space of people who give like corporate giving, right? So the really neat thing about doing an internship with LEAP is you get to see that broad spectrum of the leaders that are needed in each of those areas.
And I did a LEAP program, but it was after the fact. It wasn't an internship. It was after I already was working for an APIA serving nonprofit. And the program's called Emerging Leaders. And it was really cool because it brought a lot of people that were working in nonprofits like me together from around the country. And we, got a lot of advice about what it's like to work and, some of the challenges that we're faced with from the board of directors or, some of the things that sometimes the challenges that we face from within the community and in trying to do our jobs and remain mission-oriented but have these real business needs like making sure your nonprofit is running and things like that. So it's really cool. You continue to get support regardless of what stage you're in. Is there another question? And it doesn't have to be about us. Think of this as like an advice column in 3D or something. So if there is something, you go ahead.
So I know that there's a lot of student leaders in here very involved with the community engagement, etc. When we actually enter the real world with our potentially corporate jobs, how does one continue this community engagement and not become so complacent in their current position? My name's Annie.
Oh, what school are you from?
UC San Diego.
So I don't work corporate, so I can't fully answer this, but I think you don't have to work at a nonprofit or community-based organization to do good for the community. You know, in fact, some nonprofits are not run very well, and people get jaded, and it's a whole mess, right? But the most important thing is that you have your community-mindedness in whatever position you do. And I think the thing that you have to keep in mind too is that a lot of corporate groups, you know, their idea of community-mindedness is just charity. And I think the important thing is you have to keep in mind justice. You know, and I think it's part of reimagining, right? Is that the first? Justice is important, right? It's great that you go and feed the homeless once every week, but what are you doing with your company's resources to end homelessness in your area, right? I think that's the most important thing. I'm not saying that charity is not needed. I think as long as you're doing charity with the justice in mind, that's needed. People need help, you know? So whatever job you do, if your company doesn't offer it, I would say just go off on your own and find some place to be involved in the community, listen. Listening is very important.
So I would add that it's a great question because I feel like it's really complacent. You can be complacent because you're like, oh, I'm getting paid. So I come from the corporate sector. So you're kind of like, oh, you know, I get paid really well. I have a great job. But it's also about growing other people around you. So for example, if there are other APIs that are coming into the company, how do you help them grow? How do they get leadership positions? Because even if you look around on campus, it's like, who are the student leaders? When you look at your company, you're going to see less and less people of color be at the top, right? And so what do you do at your organization to help move people up, whether it's yourself? Because sometimes we have to look at ourselves and say, are you willing to be that leader, right? Not say, well, maybe it's not me, but so-and-so is really great. Like, you can do it. And when you do it, you set the example for other people who may be looking at you, right? So when you become a manager, that puts you in a position to be able to hire other people of color, right? So, and then you bring on other people who share your perspectives that can shape policies at your company that can help the community. So you've always got to be looking at, like, how do you bring other people with you? How do you promote the interests of your community? How do you make it known? So whether it's like, you know, doing charity work, which is one piece of it, or participating in panels like this and giving back to your community that way, it's about being engaged. And I think you can do that by being in a leadership position, by, you know, speaking up at meetings about your perspective and just being relevant.
I mean, I think many organizations, because the one thing I do want to say is that you can be in a nonprofit and also be really complacent, right? Like, you can go in, clock out, like, just like kind of push paper around and do your thing, and so, and then you can be anywhere and be really passionate about the community and about giving back and whatever that means and whatever thing that you're trying to change. Right, and so yeah, so there's charity, there's speaking at panels, there's sort of making sure that things change in terms of policies within your agency, and then many groups, many corporate groups and other organizations also do a lot of time, right? They give back in time. So SAN has had plenty of assistance from different corporate groups who've come out and spent a day or a week, or they come back once a month and they volunteer at one of our events, or they help us with something in specific. And you can have a great skill that you can also give back to either a nonprofit, but you don't have to give it back to a nonprofit structure. You can also give it back to the community. So maybe you know all about community gardening, and you're gonna have a little community garden where you live, and that's your way to sort of, you know, feed people and give back. So I think there's so many different ways that you can do it, and if it's about fighting complacency, because complacency can happen in all the different aspects of our life, and so there's great nonprofits and there's not great nonprofits, and so it's really about like where that passion lies, and I think also for me at least, it's about getting to the root of it, right? So it's not about sort of we all need services, and we all need, you know, like nonprofits need grants. So we love charity, we love the money, please, right? But it's about, but what are we doing with that? Are we then getting to the root of the problem, or are we just kind of like sort of paving over it? You know, because if it's about ending violence or creating really healthy communities and making sure that people have the right food to eat, then, and you can do that in so much of the different work that you do.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question question for Tami.
What's your name and where do you go?
I'm Rebecca. I go to ECI, and I was wondering how did your experience with apps at ECI, I guess, affect or benefit you in the workforce?
So all the things that we're talking about, I thought APSA was like a small, like a practice area. So for example, I was the treasurer of APSA, and the really neat thing that I got to do, which nobody wanted to do, was I got funding for the organization. So that meant that I would go and figure out, like, okay, so where do we get funding? So the way that so what I'll do is I'll kind of give an example of what I did at APSA and how it translates, right? So one of the things I had to do is figure out, like, what's the structure? Where do we write to? Like, what offices give money? So what that translates to the workplace is I always get to the structure. Who makes decisions? Who makes budget decisions? Who does the hiring? Who does the firing? Who do I need to influence to get things done? And that's what I did for APSA, is I figured out, okay, if we get like, this dean on board with us, or like this student center, or like these other student unions to support what we're doing, then it could be like a big thing, and I could make the argument that this was affecting not just API students, but all students of color, or like the women, and like the LGBT community also. So I feel like that translates again to my real work life, because it's about having relationships with all different types of people, and bringing people together. And that's what you do as a student organizer, right? The other thing it taught me was to face rejection. So you're gonna fail, you're gonna have people not believe in your cause, and you're gonna have people who don't even understand why you guys are here on a Saturday. Like, why should you guys care? Or like, why I hate how people call nonprofits, because it's kind of like how Scott said his dad, like when you translate it in Vietnamese, it really, like you're saying non-profit, like no money. So I don't know, like that doesn't really help, but it's about shifting it and changing it to be about community work. So like for my parents, it's like I'm doing things that benefit the community, right? And so now they may or may not buy it, but the point is that you have to shape it to, so that's the other skill that I learned about being a student organizer, is you've got to get people on board with what you believe in. That comes from knowing what that is, and then being able to say it with conviction. And that means speaking loudly. So part of it is, as a student organizer, you can't be talking like a wilting flower, right? So when you go in the corporate sector, you got to be the same way. Because if you don't stand out and you don't make your cause known, they're going to pass you over for whoever else needs to make their cause, right? So I feel like that's kind of the skills that you learn being an APSA. Use it as a testing space and see how far you can go. Create new programs. Like ask for thousands and thousands of dollars and get it reduced to hundreds if you need to. But why don't you reach for the top and then see what it can get, It's a safe space to do that as a student. So that's what I would say to you right now.
We've got a hand in the back.
Can you share one of your projects that you're working with, and that you're working on, and how it affects the community?
Sure. So SAN is multi-issue. We do health and healthcare access, immigration and civil rights, and violence prevention. So that's a boatload of everything. And so I'm a big fan of intersecting. I think one of the things that we're doing right now, for example, is addressing I would call it homophobia in the South Asian American community. So there's sort of a lack of, there's a lot of issues around gender that I work on in terms of violence prevention, but we also link in gender and sexuality. So for example, we do film screenings. There's this really great documentary on being, of South Asians coming out. And the documentary is based in India, but I think it really resonates for the folks here. And so to have that and then have discussions with parents who are struggling because their children have come out and they're struggling with that, or with youth who are struggling to come out to their parents. So that's just one of the many things.
Well, there's two programs I want to talk about really quick. One, we're about access to healthy environments, and one thing we're trying to do, we got this small grant. The program's called Bike to China, and it's not what you think it is, but it's a gimmicky name to get people to think about it. So from Chinatown in LA to China is about 5,000 miles. So what we did is we got a $5,000 grant. We're getting the youth from Chinatown. We're giving 25 youth bikes, and over a 3-month span, they have to ride 5,000 miles. Now, that's great because they get to keep the bikes if they do it. But the point of it really is we're taking them out on field trips every other week 2 different parts of LA. So we'll take them to South LA, there's a Ride South LA Trail, Culver City, different areas, to get them to look at urban planning. We're going to do workshops to say, what do you see in this neighborhood versus what's in your own neighborhood? The problem with Chinatown is that the goal for people there is to leave Chinatown. And the thing is, gentrification is moving in, the Walmart's moving in, all these different things are moving in. How do we make sure that the community members who care, who live there, can make a difference in their own community before they just leave? So that's one program. And then the other program I want to share about is called the CSA project. So it's a community-supported agriculture. And what we do is we work with a Hmong farmer from Fresno. He brings on his produce, we grab that Asian produce and we sell it back to the community for cheap. So I go to him at the end of a farmer's market every other week, we buy all the stuff that he can't sell, and we sell that to community members for a really, really affordable rate. So that's getting organic, pesticide-free Asian vegetables to community members who want that.
And I'm not working right now, but I'm a full-time student. But there's also things that you can do if you choose to go on to grad school, or you're not working, but there's so many opportunities you can still affect and impact a community. And one of the things you can do is try to take classes where you're going to learn different things that you can take back with you. So a class that I'm taking right now is called Social Entrepreneurship. How many of you guys have heard of that? Okay, cool, awesome. It's a growing idea, and it's the idea that you take something that's like a nonprofit, and we like to call them for benefit. It's not necessarily a nonprofit. It's a for benefit organization. Let's be real, or that it's a mission focused organization. But the idea is that you have something that gives back to the community, has a benefit to the community, but there's a way that you can actually earn some kind of revenue stream, so that way you don't have to go to funders every year to try to keep asking for money. You're able to generate that income somehow, and you can hire people, you can make your programs run. So that's something that you can do. Try to take classes and things, and then go to your favorite nonprofit and be like, hey, I learned something, here's the PowerPoint deck that I got, let's talk about it. And I think that's something everyone can always use information in addition to time and money. So we have a couple minutes left if we've got one more question. Oh, okay, we got 2 hands. Let's see if we can try to get both of you.
This is directed towards Tami. I'm a student at UCI as well. What's the best thing you did at UCI, and how did it impact where you are now?
Oh, I can only choose one. The best thing I did was, I kind of said this earlier, but I feel like you want to leave with people who will have your back. What I mean by that is either they're your friends, right? They're your friends and the people that you work with your organizations, or it's the administrators, like maybe it's the director of the cross-cultural center. Maybe it's one of the professors that you took a class with. Who can write a letter of rec for you and not just have it be about, oh, what was your name?
Tasha.
Tasha? Tasha was a 4.0 student and she took my class in da 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 da. It's about Tasha did X, Y, and Z. Tasha traveled abroad and really got to know the culture that she was in because she has a passion for working in the community, blah, blah, blah. Right? So the best thing I did was actually leave with those relationships. Because when you leave, I think Nikki and Scott and Simon talked about this earlier, but when you apply for a job, by the time it gets posted, it's like over. Because people like me are inside saying, I know Scott, and Scott can do this. Scott knows the community, Scott's got the skills, and I'm gonna root for Scott. So just know that when you leave, if your professor is looking out for you, they're gonna say, Tasha, there's an opening at such and such. You really should apply for this internship because that might open up an opportunity later for you to work there full time. So I think the best thing is don't just go to your classes to take classes, but really build relationships that you can take with you outside.
And then you had your hand raised?
Yeah. How do you deal with social injustices that are within organizations that you're trying to do good in? So such as if you're in government and you are working under a set of legislators and one of them is representing the Asian Pacific community and you think they're a sellout. Or you're in a charity organization, but a lot of the funding that charity gets is from tax write-offs. So how do you deal with those things that are contradictory to your own beliefs?
way to ask
Yeah,
a good
last
last question.
Well, I can jump in, so you guys should talk if you guys are ready. So the way to do it is to remember that you can either be a part of it, or you can infiltrate and figure out, I'm serious, and figure out what the loopholes are, or like why they're doing what they're doing, so you can change it. So when I worked in the legislative process, I figured out, I was like, oh, that's how they destroy a bill. Like, this was a great bill that would have helped our community. But yeah, it got me mad, but it was like, oh, that's how they do it. So think of it as, there's gonna be a lot of wrongs, right? But the other way to look at it is, how do you make that right? What is your role in that? And maybe your role is just understanding how that works so you can take it and use it against them, right? So I guess what that means is that there's gonna be, like I said, there's gonna be injustices everywhere, but it's about what you learn from it so that you can help re-educate that person that you think has sold out or whatever it is. And I guess that also depends on what you mean by sell out, right?
State Senator Leland Yee.
So
We're not naming names.
So I track with what you're saying completely. I totally do, and I would just say, then go elsewhere where you can make a difference, right? Don't spend time on things that you feel like are not going to move your cause, because you're going to find it everywhere. So you're just going to have to find that member. Maybe they're not an API member. That's the other thing I want to dispel. You don't have to work for an API member or a legislator. We call them members up there, whether a senator or an assembly member that I worked for. You could even be a staff person internally and understand the workings of the building to move things. You don't have to work for an API member to do API issues or work on API issues. So I would just say, if you're upset about it, then find a way around it. If you really care, find a way around it.
Well, I would just say there's a lot of shit that happens. There's a lot of hypocrisy anywhere you go. So you have to pick your battles, and it's something that you really believe in, you fight that. If it's something that, you're like, I support that. I mean, someone like Leland Yee, he might be on some other bill that will more directly impact you. Maybe you don't call him out on this one, but you're going to call him out on the other one, So pick your battles, because there's just so many different players, and you just got to be strategic about it.
Absolutely. Picking your battles also kind of involves taking a step back, of course, looking at the big picture, but also, try to find out what they care about. So any kind of politician or elected official cares about their votes from their constituency, and they care about how they appear in public. So, one of the ways that you can do that is organizing the people within that kind of constituency to be like, look, I'm going to educate you on something that, you might not know otherwise. And then let them make the call. But at least you've done your part to sort of educate and inform people. But again, just find out what they care about. Find out what keeps them in power. Because that's really what's going to be the kind of thing that really influences them the most. Rather than one person, you have the power to educate 10,000 or 20,000 people that are really voting for that one other person. The other thing, of course, is, and I made this mistake when I was in undergrad and I was in campus organizing, and it's that we sometimes make the mistake of painting. As much as we hate being classified and painted together with the same brush, we sometimes do that to ourselves. And so I know it's difficult, and I've been in the position where I worked for an organization and we received funding from an organization or an entity where I'm like, I don't actually like what they do, and how am I going to sleep at night and things like that. And it's can you build a relationship with any of these organizations? It's an opportunity to be like, look, you're giving funding to us. This is the benefit that you get in return. You're on our website. You're on our newsletters. We introduce you to some of the influential members of our community. But we'd also like to have a conversation with you about what we care about and how you could probably play a more important role in that, in a way that we actually feel like is going to benefit us most. So there's a way to not necessarily burn bridges, but there's a way to build a bridge that both of you have built together, and it's something that you recognize and that your community's like, that's awesome, we actually support that. So sometimes you'll have the opportunity to do that with an organization or a company, sometimes you don't. And about the tax exemption thing, that's an economic reality of the US. It's just one of the few ways sometimes that you have to incentivize those that have the money in the funds to be able to give them to the others. And it's just, I don't know if that's going to change, but we accept that as a reality. But again, that shouldn't stop you from, educating people about the issues and really being there and having a voice. Awesome. So I think with that, we're going to stick around for a little bit. If you have any questions, you can come up here. But thank you all so much for coming here. And